Hey everyone, Dylan from the future here. I had some technical difficulties, and this week and next week's episode have poor audio quality on my end. I appreciate you listening as always, and the problem has been fixed for future episodes. This episode with Emory is a great one regardless. Enjoy.
Welcome to Within Tolerance, a podcast for machinists by a machinist. I'm your host, Dylan Jackson from Protein Machining, and this week I'm joined by Emory Rempel. Welcome, Emory.
Hi, Dylan. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And so we're going to definitely get into your backstory and as well as what you're doing. And this is also our episode to go over The Perfectionists, this month's book club book. So why don't you share what you got going on? Looking at your Instagram, it looks like you're involved with at least two companies or two product lines. What do you got going on?
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting split. I'm probably involved in three companies, really. So I work for a company called J.S Foster. It's a machine shop in Victoria on Vancouver Island up in Canada. And through the shop, it's a general job shop, but on the one side of it, about 50% of what we do is our own house brand, and that's Islander fishing reels. So these are, really high-end aluminum fishing reels for mooching and fly fishing and stuff. And then on the side, I'm pretty involved in mountain bikes. So I'm developing my own mountain bike brand kind of on the weekends and at night whenever I've got a spare hour that I can get on Fusion and design some parts.
Oh, that's awesome. So you're another 80, 90-hour weeker too.
Yeah, 80 to 90 hours in between a 6-month-old baby, which is pushing us into the full 178 hours a week.
Oh boy, that's crazy. So what kind of machinery do you deal with on your day job? Are you a mill guy, lathe guy, everything in between? Do you have a machine at home that you're doing the mountain bike parts on?
I don't have anything at home. I've got my garage measured out. I've got the ceiling height measured out, but it's not happening yet. So at work, I'm a mill guy primarily. We try not to keep people boxed into one segment too much, but I definitely spend most of my day on the mills. With the fishing reel brand being so large in our company, our niche is turning. The fishing reels are built almost exclusively with turn parts, and actually the one part on it that you looked at and you'd say, "Oh, that's a mill part." We bar feed that too, so it's definitely a bit of a turning shop. But yeah, I'm typically on the mills, which means I'm mostly doing the job shop stuff. But that kind of coming to an end for me. We're about to transition. I'm gonna, with the baby, I've been working nights for the last 3 years there, and I'm gonna switch over to day shift, and I'm gonna start transitioning onto the lathe side of things. Gonna start learning Esprit software and hopefully get my hands on some programming for our new B-head NTRX Nakamura machine.
Yeah, I saw the pictures of that on your Instagram. It looks pretty epic.
Yeah, it's quite the machine. We've had it since October, and it's got a UR10 robot in front of it, and we're just starting to get the main part of the fishing reels running on that. But we've been running them up until now on a Nakuma LT 200, which has been great. It's been a cool process, but this is kind of the next level, really trying to reduce the setup times and streamline the flow of the work parts.
Yeah, definitely. So will that be nearly one and done then on the new machine?
The goal is definitely one and done. Right now, we're doing everything except a little bit of the milling of the windows on these. So the frame of the fishing reel, they're about 5-inch diameter pucks that we load in there, and they carve out the middle and they put a thread in the middle, and there's a bunch of mechanisms that are machined right into the frame of the fishing reel, so that they can do all on the NTRX, or they were doing that on the LT. But there's one process afterwards where it's just up until this point worked better to put them on the Haas, the VF4, put them there on the rotary with a tailstock so you can really hold it solid and machine away the profile around the frame of the fishing reel. But the goal is definitely to get that on the NTRX. So it's going to take some interesting programming and some work holding, and hopefully we can one and done them.
That's awesome. That'll be a big step up, especially with a robot tending it too.
Yeah, the robot's definitely a game changer. Last 6 months ago when we started installing the machine, up until then, we'd be walking over to the machine every 15 minutes to load a new puck. And I think last weekend they were able to load 37 pucks and just let the machine run. And I think it was getting 18 hours runtime, which is amazing.
That's super cool.
Yeah.
Did you guys integrate that all yourselves, or did you have a integrator help you guys out?
We did the robot ourselves. That's definitely something that the manager just kind of took on himself and sat down with the pad and drew up his system. I don't think it's the final system. It's not going to be how we'll go on forever. It was more of a let's start making parts now and let's prove out the system. Let's learn the robot. So yeah, that's where we're at with that. It's right now the biggest struggle is basically the coolant management and the chip management on that NTRX. The milling fines and stuff like that, they're always a pain on lathes, especially with those belt chip conveyors. So before we really start diving into the robot and letting that thing run for a full weekend, we got to figure out how to get chips out of there every 10 hours kind of thing.
Totally, yeah. And actually, an unreleased episode, but it'll come out in the next couple of weeks with John from Way of the Mill. We spent 5 or 10 minutes talking about how automation is like everything but the robot when it comes down to it. It's all the, chip management, coolant management, making sure you don't starve your tools, all that stuff. Like that's what really starts killing the productivity of the automation itself. So
yeah, for sure. And it's kind of surprising. I find that on all these, lathes with milling, the chip management, it's not the end of the world, but like there's a lot to be desired. It really holds up the process. Or even actually one of the things we were talking about just yesterday with my boss was, we're maybe considering another machine to do the next size down in parts. And so we're looking at like something with a 71 mil through bore. But it's like, man, the parts collector on it is what's going to be the limiting factor because it's still just a door integrated one. So it's all these little things. Yeah, it's not the automation, it's not the programs, it's not the robots. It's these little things that get you.
totally.
Or like one of your guests that you had on, Yeti Man, he makes an awesome product for the VF4, which I picked up off him probably a month ago, and I'm going to plug because it's so awesome. But he makes that Y-axis sprayer for the back of the Haas, and that has totally changed the way that machine runs. Like I used to spend half an hour to 40 minutes a day cleaning out chips, and now it's a non-issue. And why did it not come stock like that? I don't know, but it's it's a game changer.
That's awesome to hear. Yeah, I saw him release that, and I know he's got a slew of mill products now, and he just kind of popped up out of nowhere with them too. We had talked, I think, through DMs maybe a month or two ahead, and he was like, "Oh, I got some cool stuff coming down the pipeline," and then dropped all those. I was like, "Oh man, that's awesome."
Yeah, it's so intuitive too. Like when we got our Haas VF4 a year ago, almost a year to the day, and it was only a month or two into it. I was looking at the back of the machine, trying to figure out a way that I could put another coolant pump in there and plumb something in to just do exactly that, like to flush the chips out of there, especially because there's so little room back there now. With the new design, the table goes right up against the column, or against the sheet metal at least. Yeah, it just seems like a total oversight, but at least he's out there and he solved the problem. It's a lot more elegant than what I was going to do.
Well, that's great. So let's get into your backstory. How did you get to, learning, getting to the point in your career where you can learn Esprit and run a crazy machine like that?
So I kind of took a hard left turn in a career change a couple of years ago. I haven't been at this very long, and what I was doing previously had nothing to do with machining. I didn't take it in school. I've never done metalwork or woodwork or anything like that. I spent 10 years working the oil field up in northern Canada. So I was out on drilling rigs basically since I was 20. And through that, I learned a lot. It really taught you a lot of grit, how to solve problems. Like there was never going to be somebody to come out there and fix your problems for you. That was my main takeaway from my time out there was you gotta figure things out. So after doing that for about 10 years, I had met my wife and we got married, and we wanted to start a family, and it wasn't going to work, me being away 2 weeks to 30 days at a time kind of thing. So I don't want to say that I went and looked through a catalog, but I had the BCIT book open for re-educating myself. At the time, my wife was doing her pharmacy degree in Vancouver and BC at UBC. So I knew that I had about a 4-year window to retrain. And I was looking at power engineering because that was really the closest thing I could see to what I was already doing. So it would have been operating boilers and power systems in big plants and that kind of thing. But then at the same time, as I was going through the book, I could see CNC machining. And all that was doing was triggering back to my early days mountain biking and reading Race Components, CNC machined in Vancouver, BC. And like, I don't know what it was about that sentence, but they had written it on all their cranks and on all their stems. And I remember being, 14, 15, 16, working in bike shops, looking at CNC machine drop forge. I had no idea what it meant. I knew that it meant it was awesome. So I saw this program in the booklet and I figured, it was either CNC machining or power engineering. And I brought it up with my wife. I said, power engineering, it's really similar to what I do. I could probably transition really easily. But then I said, but then there's also this CNC engineering or CNC machining, which, I think might be really interesting. And she kind of said no. She said, you just want to make bike parts. And I no. Well, okay, maybe. So yeah, I signed up for that one, and I got really lucky. There was a 3-year wait to get in, and I got put on a short list. They kind of just called me up one day when I was still in northern Alberta, and they said, "Hey, if you want to start in 2 months, you can come down." And it aligned perfectly with when my rig was shutting down. And so, yeah, I just kind of walked off the rig one day and didn't come back. And yeah, it turned out really well. It turns out it's exactly what I should have been doing my whole life, really. It's clicked with me so well. The funny thing was starting school, I had not done any research, even though I still knew that CNC machining, I generally knew what it was. It was manufacturing things. But I remember about the day before school was starting, I went on YouTube and I was like, I better look up what this milling and this turning thing is. So I was on YouTube and I found a video of some guy in his garage turning on a manual lathe. And my wife and I were sitting there looking at the video, and she looks over. She's like, "That looks really satisfying." I was like, "That does look really satisfying. I'm glad I picked this."
Oh my goodness, that's so awesome.
Yeah. A couple days later, I was in the program, and everything just kind of clicked for me. I really enjoyed manual machining. I thought that was awesome. I got a really good position in the co-op term that we had. So I went to BCIT as a CNC machinist technician, and that was an 8-month term in manual machining, then an 8-month co-op, and then an 8-month CNC term. And basically on day one, when I walked in, they sit you down and they start prepping you to go on your work term, your co-op term. And the counselor that was in there, she said, there's some shops around Vancouver that are really good. There's some that you'll learn a lot. There's some that you'll work hard. There's some that you'll make a lot of money. And out of all the places, one that she mentioned was Focus Manufacturing. Said, if you want to learn a lot, you want to go to Focus. And so immediately I was like, I'm going to Focus. That's going to be my job. And when I went in for an interview there, the guy that was interviewing, the owner of the shop, he came out and he had a Nolly t-shirt. Nolly is a mountain bike brand from Vancouver. I had a Nolly. I'm a huge Nolly fan. So he's wearing their t-shirt, and I think he's 60 years old. He's a Swiss machinist that came over, immigrated from Switzerland. So I saw his shirt and I said, "Hey, Nolly." And he looks at it and he's like, "Oh, yeah. What do you know about Nolly?" I was like, "Well, I've got one. I love them." So he's like, "Oh, I'll show you something about Nolly." And we go into his office and he's got all the hardware and all the linkages and like all the components of the original Nolly bikes. And I was like, "Oh man, this is my shop. Like, how did I wind up here?" And he said,
so cool.
Yeah, he said the owner of Nolly had started in his shop a couple of years before. Well, I guess at this point would have been 15 years before. And he started building these bikes as a side project in his shop, and to the point where it grew and they basically had to boot him out into their own space, and then they're getting their bikes made in the big factories with everybody else. And yeah, it's an international brand, but it was just cool to see that connection. So yeah, I got that job. We got on really well, and it was a great place to learn. I have a lot of good things to say about that shop. It was just an awesome learning experience. And then after that, I kept working there through the CNC portion of the BCIT program. And as soon as I was done, I applied at J.S. Foster. I applied at a couple other places in Victoria, and I probably could have gotten a job at 2 or 3 places. Vancouver Island's not very big for manufacturing. It's definitely not, we don't have a major industrial zone. We don't have large and manufacturing facilities. So my options were not huge. I had probably 4 or 5 shops that I could apply at. And J.S. Foster, when I walked through there, what I noticed first was, I don't want to, in case anybody's listening, but there was a lot of old guys working there, which in my mind, I was like, okay, this is perfect. What I want is to work under really experienced people. And that's basically what I got. Most of the people there have 20 to 30 years experience, which I find that really impressive that people are able to keep jobs that long. And like, to me, that just said, this has to be a good place to work. And it is. I totally get why they've been there so long. So yeah, so I got hired on at J.S. Foster, and I've been, I don't know, 3 years now, I guess. Yeah, and I've got a really good relationship with the current manager, and he's a young guy. We like to experiment with a lot of stuff. We like to push whatever boundaries we can. Yeah, it's been a really, really good road.
That's awesome. So looking at the website, it looks like you guys also do traffic lights.
Yeah, okay, so this company's been around for, I think, 50 years. It's third generation, or coming into its third generation. Machine shop was started in 1970, I believe. From that, it spawned the Islander Fish and Reel brand. So Islander Fishing Reels was started by a machinist on the floor, which was, I find it, a super cool backstory. So one of the machinists was, I guess they had some downtime on some of the lathes, and he had a drawing, and he said, "Hey, we can make some of these fishing reels that I've got designed." And the owner said, "Yeah, that sounds like." The owner was big into sailing, and he said, "Yeah, that sounds like something we could definitely get in with." So they designed and made the first center pin reels, and then after that, they started selling them to a distributor who said, "Hey, you guys could really do a fly reel like this." And basically from there, the company grew. And then, like you said, the traffic thing, that was a third company that split off from there, where they had a couple engineers start designing solar panel controlled traffic control. So it's like whenever the city doesn't want to dig up a road to put a crosswalk in, they put these crosswalks on that are solar panel controlled and everything. So that itself has split off, and it's another company, and we still do a couple parts for them. And then now it's got a fourth division that's split off because the traffic signal section had gotten so big that they've completely overwhelmed all the powder coaters in Victoria. So the powder coaters didn't want to add another shift, and they didn't want to buy more bays. So the owner said, well, I guess we'll have to build a powder coating facility. So now we've got a powder coating facility beside us.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, so it's cool. It's diverse. The way those companies are split off, they're definitely separate entities. So there's a lot of back and forth. Like, I can walk over, if we're doing a shop project, I can walk over and get it powder coated today, kind of thing, which is wicked. But it's not like we're not in the same building. We don't have the same staff.
Right.
So yeah, there's definitely division between those companies.
That's cool. And look at the website. It looks like you guys have some 5-axis too.
Yes. Yeah. The week I started, they got that Matsura MX330 with a PC10 pallet and 100 tools on it. So yeah,
Nice.
that's a very cool machine.
That's wicked. How do you guys like it? Because I know I've heard very differing viewpoints, depending on who you talk to.
Yeah, I don't get my hands on it too often, so I don't, I couldn't tell you how it actually performs. It's hard to say. I think that machine's very job specific, right? Like you see a big Matsura like that with that spindle on it, and you expect it to be able to just hog, but it's more of a light duty machine. So if you're expecting something that's just going to, plug through steel all day, I probably would go with one of their beefier machines, one of the bridge style ones. It's still got a C frame, so it's kind of like your standard Haas in terms of its construction.
Interesting.
Yeah, but then again, for what depends what you're doing. Like you see, who's that MJK, Dr. Phil? They're using it for their production work, and it seems to be doing great for them.
Yeah, they make a lot of really nice parts on it, that's for sure.
Yeah, for prototyping, it's got 10 pallets, so it's really wicked to have 10 jobs set up, and I think we've got 70 of the tools are just standardized, so 70 of them don't come out. So when you're going to set up something new, it's really fast. But yeah, in terms of is it good for everybody? I doubt it.
Right.
If you got the right jobs for it, I think it's the wicked machine. It surfaces so nice.
Very cool. So let's get into your brand as well. You've kind of started a mountain bike component brand. Where did you start? Where are you at? What's going on with that?
Yeah, so timing on this is pretty good. I have only officially had a company for, I think, a week. Thank you. Yeah, so when was this? Probably about 2 years ago. This all kind of coincides with me starting my job at J.S Foster. When I walked in there, they were transitioning to Fusion 360 for the shop in general. So they were moving from Mastercam over to Fusion, and it was just really good timing for me to start learning Fusion on my own. Like I'd done a little bit of Mastercam in school, and I knew that Fusion was out there. I knew that it was free. So to walk into a shop and then say, "Hey, we're starting now, moving everything we can onto Fusion," that was just perfect timing. I said, "Okay, I'm downloading it today. I'm going to learn it." So at home, I'm trying to like race ahead and catch up to all these really experienced machinists. So I'm picking projects, I'm trying to design things. I picked a project that was kind of way over my head. I was trying to design a bike rack for the back of my car. Just there was some issues with the racks I had seen and been using, and I got so bogged down in like this massive assembly, and I didn't know how to do anything on it. So I was like, I just knew I had to scale this back. It's like I got to take on something that's accessible to me, something that I can actually follow through with and not just kind of lose interest in. So I started designing a stem, mainly because I wanted to try a shorter stem on my mountain bike, and I wanted to move up to a larger bar, and I did not want to go out and buy one at that time. So long story short, 2 years later, I didn't have to buy a stem. Yeah, so I started designing it, and I started playing with every feature I could find in Fusion, trying to play with shape in this way and that way. And it turned into, I thought, a simple, accessible project. But like anything, once you start getting into it, everything is complicated. Everything is hard. The shape really started to evolve on me until I got to something that I was really, really happy with. Actually, I was really excited with the end shape. And then I started thinking, okay, I gotta figure out how I can test this. So then you start diving into the FEA side of things, and that's when you realize, okay, there's a whole other side of Fusion that I don't understand. But every step of the way, this is like it's feeding off of what I'm doing at work. So I'm learning something at home when I get home at 1 a.m. and I program on Fusion for an hour and a half, and now I'm that much better when I get to work, and then I work, and then I'm that much better for when I get home. And so it was a good feedback loop. So a couple iterations down the road, I've got some time on my hand. There was a project that we were working on at the shop where we wanted to completely renovate one section of the shop and turn it into a tooling crib. So I went in there, we hired a friend of mine to do the construction on it, and while he was there working on that, I said, I'm going to run the VF3 and I'm going to prototype this. So I did, and it was one of those things where I had 3D printed the original model that I had designed, and I looked at it immediately and I was like, nope, I got to change this and this. And then I did not 3D print the second model.
Oh, no.
I just went and machined it, and I was so excited while I was machining it. Like, I was using all of these tool paths. I was using like rotary tool paths and stuff, just doing any fancy feature I could. And I was so excited. And I got it home and I put it on my bike. And immediately I was like, nope, it
Oh,
just doesn't look good. So I had it on there for about 2 rides and then I took it off. And, maybe 2 days later, I had the next version modeled up where I slimmed things out and I got the proportions to look better, which is unfortunate because that I really could have just 3D printed, thrown it on my bike, and I would have immediately known that like the proportions were just a little bit too off, right?
yep.
So that was a learning moment. But yeah, then I wound up with the current version, which I've kind of been sitting on for, I don't know, about a year. Wasn't quite sure what I was going to do with it. I knew that I wanted to take this somewhere. I knew that I wanted to try selling things. I think you've referenced that a few times too. Like at Prodium, you just want to throw your hat in the ring, make a product, and go through the process, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, like the way I described it, I think with Clive is like I know at some point I'm gonna have some idea that I'm super passionate about, and the last thing I want is like when I'm trying to sell that product is to be encumbered by figuring out how to run a sellable product business at that point. Like I
Yeah.
want to have that under my belt, have that process dialed, or at least maybe not dialed, but at least know what I'm doing, so that when I jump into that, it's like, oh, now I don't have to worry about figuring out sales tax and all of this stuff. I want all that ready to go so that I can just focus on executing on the product.
Yeah, exactly. That's I've kind of made that point to myself as well. Like there's been a couple times when I was working in bike shops where I've been looking at products and I know that there's a better way to do things or there's something that you could improve on, but you're just kind of you got your hands tied in terms of your ability to actually execute on that. So the idea behind this was I'm not actually innovating anything here, but it's a little bit like rims on a car. Like there's a lot of this that is aesthetic. It's a style thing. It's also an arena where I could compete in terms of weight and price and strength, but I'm not pushing the boundaries on any of these things. But the idea was to have a safe product that exactly like you said, I can have an avenue to sell to people. And then when you get hit with that idea, like, oh, hey, this is a problem that we can solve, you've already got that avenue. You've got the website, you've got access to customers. They know what you make, they know the quality that you bring. So that's what this is. It's, laying the groundwork for future developments for that time, when you get that product where you're like, yes, this is where we'll excel. And
Totally.
in
Well, I'm looking at your Instagram right now, and like I love like you said, it's not like an innovation, but like I love the demotivational top caps and all that stuff. Like that is totally my type of humor. So I really appreciate that.
Yeah, the demotivational top caps actually were kind of like another level of what we're just talking about, where I'm sitting here. The stem I have to actually put a lot of work into, in that it needs to be tested by somebody. It takes a lot of money. I need to be incorporated to sell it for liability purposes and stuff. And so I kind of started having this little panic attack where I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do to get this out of there. I need to make something really simple and get it out now. And that's what the top caps were. So it was a second level of, introducing myself to the customers. And that was a simple one. I was able to design that over a day kind of thing. And the laser engravings that we've got on them are definitely tongue in cheek and a little bit cheeky. But it's because everything that I saw out there was like, try harder, just push. I'm like, that's not me. I'm
You're like,
pretty
just
sarc.
walk it.
Yeah, just walk it. Turn down the suck.
I love that. No, that's great. I appreciate that. You realized that you were having this hurdle, and so you're like, oh, we'll just detour a little bit and get that going, and then we can come back to that. So
Yeah, course correction. The other thing with the stem is that it's going to take some abuse, and it's a fairly integral part in your handling system. So it's not the kind of thing you want to just wing it. So I've actually recently partnered with a guy who owns a bicycle shop up in a town called Duncan, so a little bit north of us. He had an idea for a product as well, and he contacted me. And after we started talking about it, it's like, you know what, these products are really similar. They're at least going to occupy the same space. I was like, I don't know that it makes sense for me to design it and then make it for you, because we'll basically be competing for the same customers. It didn't make sense. So what we decided to do was partner together. So that's really kind of thrown fuel on the fire for getting this actually turned out and turned into a product. So he's come in and he's helping me move this forward. So, you know, immediately we sent my prototype out to Germany, where they're stress testing it and getting it ISO certified and all the stuff that I want to have to feel good about selling it to somebody. Like, I know it's a block of aluminum and it's big, and I've got one on my bike, and I'll test it, and I've got people that are testing it, but I just want that extra, you know, somebody that knows what they're doing has gone through this thing and approved it.
Yeah, no, it totally makes sense. Both Brad and I are big car guys, and like I've always felt super hesitant to do anything mission critical. Like I'd love to do big brake kits or something like that for both of our cars, because they're older cars that don't have a whole bunch of support, and like what's out on the market is like either incredibly expensive or just not that great. But again, you know, just the liability is like, when you said that it made you, you know, take a step back, like I totally empathize there, because that's exactly how I felt anytime I'm like, oh, well, I'll design this and sell it. It's like, maybe I'll just design it and just put it on my car, because yeah, it's tough.
Yeah, I'll make one.
Right. Yeah.
But then, you know, there's definitely like a risk reward kind of thing. You don't want to get too stuck in the imposter syndrome, as they call it, right? Not to disparage engineers, but you see the drawings. I don't know that there's those that know what they're doing, but I don't think these type of things are that far out of reach. Yeah. And the amount of resources available now, yeah, it's not a huge leap to start making and selling this type of product. Where the world is right now is really cool. You know, there's not a lot you can't go out and learn and do on your own.
Yeah, everyone is poised, or you know, anybody who wants to get in this is poised to be able to take advantage of social media. You know how easy it is to get information and Fusion and you know software like that. It really is much easier than it ever has been to start a business like that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and we're all super excited. Actually, my material showed up last week, so I got my first email back from the company in Germany saying, you know, your stem passed all the strength analysis tests. So it was game on immediately. I went into work and put in the order for material. I went and ordered a couple tools that, you know, will just make them look that much nicer. And yeah, tomorrow morning I'm going in and we're going to start the first production run, you know, in air quotes. It's going to be pretty conservative, but we'll get hopefully 50 to 70 parts out there, which, yeah, I'm super excited about. This is going to be a whole other learning curve, you know.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, it's not just running parts anymore. It's turning into running a business, and like you said, taxes and stuff. I don't know what to do. The first couple parts I sold, you know, these were cash only. Like, I don't even know how to write an invoice. I had to Google how to write an invoice the other day.
I remember doing the same the first time we had to send out for anodize. They were like, well, you need to give us a PO. And I was like, oh, okay, I'll figure it out. Like, and had to, you know, dive into like my accounting software and be like, where's the PO? Where's the button for that? Like, yeah. So I totally get what you're going through. So yeah. I'll go for it.
I was just going to say, you only go through it once, though. Like, once you know, and then it's just another tool in the box.
Yeah. So we had one question from the listeners. Triple Caution Machine Works asked, what's your favorite piece of equipment? Lathe, mill, cobot, laser? Oh, actually, I guess he's got a couple questions there. So that's the first one. And then what was one thing that surprised you most about making your own product?
Okay, favorite piece of equipment. You know what? I'm going to come off as a bit of a Haas fanboy here, but I love our VF4. It's awesome. Yeah, other than the one little issue that I had with its crappy chip management at the back, it's awesome. I love the way it works. I love the control. I love how intuitive it is. I love how, you know, the tolerances it holds are everything I need. Yeah, it's an awesome mill, and the way I've got it set up is, it's really nice for the type of work that we do. I've got a 0 point system set up, and I've got kind of the Rob Lockwood system of programming everything with the container method, and it just works super fast. There's nothing that I complain about. Now, we did get a pretty optioned out VF4. I don't think I left anything off that thing, but yeah, it's awesome. I definitely don't complain about it.
Yeah, it
And
looks like you got 2 oranges on there, double stations, and the 0 point.
yeah, you got two orange vice double station. I've got the 5th axis, and then I've got the 5th axis. The real game changer is the rock lock on the rotary, and that has changed everything. Like, I've got a Lang chuck that has the pull studs directly on it, and it goes right onto the rotary. It's just so fast to set up rotary jobs now. And then you can put the rotary chuck on the base plate on the table and machine your soft jaws. And just being able to do that, switch them back and forth, it's so good. There's some jobs where I don't even take the part out of the chuck. I just move it from the rotary to the plate, and it's kind of like having a poor man's 5-axis.
That's awesome. That was really cool.
And then for the thing that surprised me about making my own product, I can't say that anything's surprised me. It's maybe you don't realize how much is involved. And it's not even how much it's involved, but there's nothing that's done for you. Like, every single thing needs to be done. Like, I've got the first prototype that I had that was finished and that I thought was good enough to sell to somebody. Somebody contacted me. I'm going to give him a little plug here. His name's Jesse. He makes Wildwood bikes out in Nanaimo. So this guy's making custom hardtails mountain bikes, and they are absolutely beautiful. He called me up and he said, "Hey, that's a wicked looking stem. I'd love to put it on my current build." So I was like, "Yeah, that's awesome. I'd love to sell that." So I packed it up and I looked around. I was like, I have nothing to put this in. Like, what do I do? Put this in a Ziploc bag and hand it to him? Like, this is so amateur. And so
Right.
I looked around.
Drug deal going down kind of thing.
So I 3D printed a box and I gave it to him in that. But it's that type of thing where, like, every little detail you have to think about. So I'm talking to the packaging company now. We're getting our boxes made. You have to custom order boxes, which means they have to order a custom die to cut the boxes to ship you the boxes, which is actually reasonable too. The price on it is good, so I'm not complaining, but it's just, every little thing. And then they're going to show up, and then I'm going to look at it and go, well, how do I put it in the box? Like, what do I wrap it? Do I tape it?
Right. Yeah.
It's just every little step.
Cool. Yeah, I totally understand that. I mean, I don't make my own products yet, but even shipping customer parts, I remember at the beginning, it's like, what do we do? And, like, thankfully, when we had first started making a lot more parts and taking it more seriously is when we got in with Xometry. And so, like, they have a whole bunch of standards on how to pack things and how to bag and tag and all that. And so, like, we just kind of adopted what they forced us to do at the beginning. And actually, what's funny is, like, they ended up getting super lax on all of that, and so it wasn't really required anymore. But then it just became a habit. So it's like, Ziploc bags for each individual part, tags for everything, wrapping the bubble wrap a certain way, all that stuff. So it's I think we were lucky that we lucked in, or that we had that kind of influence on us early on, because it's definitely made sure that our parts are at least safe 98% of the time.
That's actually a good way to go, especially, like, I don't know, at your day job, it sounds like it's fairly a big shop, right? Like, you probably don't get your hands on the shipping or any of that. Yeah, when I was working at Focus, like, it was such a small shop that you did do everything. I would receive the material, cut the material, run the parts, wrap the parts, pack the parts, load the parts, get them out, kind of thing. So it's nice to get that kind of experience, so you do understand, start to finish, how things move through a shop. Whereas at our current shop, it's big enough that, I don't know. I get cut blanks that are deburred already, and then they leave, and that, put them on the purple rack and they're gone.
Yeah, there's something to be said about both, for sure. Like, there's a big learning in a small shop, and then there's something nice about just being able to head down focus on making parts.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, very cool. So the other reason I had you on was you volunteered to kind of be a test bed for this whole new book club format. We did the Purple Cow last, and that worked out pretty well. And our book this month was The Perfectionists by Simon Winchester. So what do you think of the book?
I really liked the book. Yeah, it was a good read. So I'm going to use the word read interchangeably for the word listen. I listen to my books on Audible because I've got a 2-hour commute. So if anybody hasn't read it or listened to it, I highly recommend listening to it. It's like listening to David Attenborough, like a Planet Earth documentary. It's really great.
I was going to say the exact same thing because I had started reading it. One of the reasons I kind of brought up this book, and I think somebody had maybe you were the one who put it in your stories and said maybe this should be our next book, or somebody did. But I've had this book for like a year and a half, 2 years, and I've always gotten like halfway through it and then had something come up. And that seems to be the case with a lot of the books that I'm going to push on this. Is like, well, I'm going to force myself to read it because I have to for the podcast, but then I didn't have time to read it, so I actually downloaded it 2 weeks ago and was listening to it. And it's so enjoyable. Like, it's read by the author, I think.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting to hear him say his own words. Like, there are parts, I can't remember what chapter it's in, but he's talking about the metric system, and then like briefly mentions like, oh, there's only 2 countries, like Ghana and the US. And the disdain in his voice of like talking about only 2 countries using the imperial system was just so funny to me. And like, I had read that passage and didn't think anything of it, but hearing him say it was so funny.
Yeah, the way he describes stories, I can imagine reading it would be, I would probably get lost in his words if he's reading it the way he's speaking. But yeah, to hear it, it's captivating. What I liked about the book the most, it's probably because your book club that you've been doing actually parallels the semi book club we've been doing at work. So about 2 years ago, my boss started pushing the goal on everybody. So I read that then. I read the E-Myth, and then there's 2 other books after the goal by Gulderat that they weren't as good. I didn't find them as good, but still read those. Purple Cow I thought was actually amazing. That one kind of got me by surprise. I really like that. But what I like about The Perfectionist was all those other books they're trying to drive you towards something. They're changing your behavior. They're getting you to think in a different way. This wasn't that. This is a history lesson, and it's kind of a nice palate cleanser where you're like, okay, somebody's not, highlighting the things that I'm not doing right. They're not criticizing my leadership ability here.
That was one reason I kind of wanted to go down this route, is that, I definitely feel the same way. Like, I get motivational overload sometimes. It's like, I don't need to read more and try to do more. It's like, sometimes I just want to read something cool about what I love.
Yeah.
And that was really, I think this book does that so well. Like, all the stories are so interesting, and I really appreciate the way he tells the story. I don't know if you've read Extreme Ownership.
Yep.
So they tell stories very similarly, where they have like a personal story that's an example of the lesson they're trying to teach, and maybe another one, and then like the lesson, or like whatever the point of the chapter was. And both books kind of do that, and it makes it, like, especially with The Perfectionist, sometimes they'll start a story and you're like, how is this at all going to relate to what we're talking about this chapter? And then he somehow makes that connection, and it's so cool.
Yeah, the story about the Rolls Royce was definitely, when he started getting into that, I was like, what is he talking about? And is this just some old English wingbag going on about the glory days of Rolls Royces? But no, then it actually turns into really, really cool backstory, how the company came about. And what blows my mind about the book is the first bored gun barrel that they're talking about is, what was that, late 1700s? And then it feels like the next chapter, but it's not. It's actually the end of the book, is when they're talking about semiconductors that are so small they're shorter than the wavelength of light. They're technically invisible. It's only a 200 and something year gap. Like, they've gone from turning the first drill to being ever able to measure the distance to Alpha Centauri down to, I think they said 5 thou.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
they can
Yeah.
measure
Exactly.
they can measure 4 trillion kilometers within 5 thousandths of an inch in 250 years. I find that absolutely shocking.
Yeah. Yeah. I love the way. By the way, the other thing that I found hilarious about the narration is that every chapter, when he's talking about the tolerance he's talking about,
Yeah.
and by the end, it's just like 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. I'm like, all right, I get it. Like, it's a lot.
Did you find yourself counting on your hands as he's numbering zeros, and you're like, "How many is this?"
Yeah. Oh, yeah. By the end, I was like, I don't even know what number that is. Like, I couldn't tell you at this point.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
yeah, it's cool.
it's pretty crazy when he's talking about the density of semiconductors on those integrated circuits. Like, I'm just picturing trying to, I don't know what it was, 7 billion to the square millimeter or something like that. I'm just trying to picture, like, in Fusion when you pattern out like 15 items, how much processing time that takes. Like, how do you even design a circuit board that's patterned 7 billion times?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'd really like to see how that modern stuff is. And I had no idea. So, like, Chandler in that semiconductor chapter that they talk about, that's like an hour and a half north of me. So I was
really?
like, you got to be kidding me. Like, that's so close. And I had no idea that any of this was going on. I mean, from the way they talk about it, it sounds like that's kind of the point, is that they don't want anybody knowing that that's where they're doing it.
Yeah.
And I know that IBM, I think it's IBM, maybe it's Intel, somebody just built a big manufacturing plant in Washington or the Pacific Northwest somewhere. So for all I know, that information might be outdated. I mean, it was only written, 2017, but still a lot happens in 4 years.
Yeah. Yeah. It's cool the way he narrates too. How lucky is it to have somebody that can tell stories like that? And also, it sounds like he was born of a clockmaker, or his dad was an engineer to some degree. Like, it was a good thing he didn't grow up in my house, otherwise he'd be telling stories about hammering 2x4s back together after you cut them too short.
Yeah, no, and some of the stories, like, I really loved the juxtaposition between Ford's story and Royce's story. Like, the basic ends to their goals were very similar. Make a car, but like the way they went about it and the tolerances and all of that was very, very interesting. And I had never, so I've always seen on eBay all of these Johansson block branded Ford blocks. And I was like, how did that happen? And then having the story of that, he actually brought him in house and made him part of the Ford Motor Company. So like, oh, that makes so much more sense.
Another, and this is kind of a weird coincidence, but when he's talking about the Rolls-Royce jet engines and how he starts with that engine failure, that literally just happened, a month ago? That was all over the news. They had a recent one.
Yeah. Southwest, I think. They had a engine come apart or something like that.
Yeah. So it's crazy to read about it and the detail on what's actually happening, and then to watch, this is still a problem.
Yeah, I couldn't believe, they were talking about cooling channels being just slightly off because the fixture moved or something. I'm like, oh man, you see that all the time, and it really does come down to just good inspection and making sure that everybody's on board. It's crazy how such a slight mistake can ground an entire fleet.
Yeah, it's insane.
But yeah, I like the way the book starts too, talking about, I mean, I think that a lot of us in the trade know the difference between like precision and accuracy, but I think that's a good point to be made because a lot of people use them interchangeably. Yeah. And understanding hitting your target or hitting your target multiple times is like, they're two different things. And I think that a lot of us see that. We deal with plus or minus tolerances, and you're like, well, I'm not on nominal, but I'm within tolerance, and I'm hitting that plus 3 thou or whatever, 3/10 consistently. So
yeah, it's worrying when your parts are coming out +3, then -3, then +3, then -3. You're like, I don't like this. I'd rather be just out of tolerance than all over.
Oh yeah. When I loved the whole section on the development of jet engines too. Like, I had no idea the story of it, and that they were developed, so quickly after, I guess, sort of commercial air flight started, and just by a pilot who was smart and kind of cocky and just writing a paper like, I see this going away. I see all these prop planes as antiques already.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. It's funny. Back when I was working on the oil rigs, I kind of planned getting out of the rigs earlier, and I actually went and became a commercial helicopter pilot. So I've run a couple of those C-20 jet engines on Bell Jet Rangers, and to hear them describe, exactly how they're made and stuff, and how they're running. I've had the other side where you're actually sitting there running them, and yeah, they're like, these things are insane. When you're firing up a jet engine, it's idling at something like 20,000 RPM, and the temperature gauges on them are hitting basically melting point of all the components, and that's your starting point. You basically melt them down on the ground, and then eventually they're sucking in enough air that they actually exhaust all that heat, and they come back down into a normal range. It's crazy though to think that those were designed, built, and machined before computers by
Oh yeah,
like 40 years.
yeah. Well, and I recommended one on the pod. I think it was either last week or the week before, the one that I recorded. So there's these talks by this guy Nicholas Means, and he does them at DevCon or something like that every year. And he's a software engineer that leads a team. I think he's at Tumblr, or I think he's at GitHub now. But anyway, he's got all these talks, and he's actually like super, super interested in aerospace and about planes. And so one of them that's really relevant to that chapter is he talks about the blanking on the plane crash, but it was one of the 3 jet planes, DC-10, and he talks about the plane crash and what lessons you can learn from the cockpit crew that saved, I think, half the passengers on board by what they did. And he's got another one talking about Lockheed Skunk Works, going back all the way to the beginning of it and going all the way through. But some of the interesting tidbits from it, and I'll let people go out and find them. Maybe I'll post them in the show notes. But one of the tidbits is, the original F-117 stealth bomber, and it's all flat planes and all of that.
Yep.
Well, speaking of computers not being able to do it, the reason it's all flat planes is that the computers at that time did not have the processing power to compute the radar cross section of a curved surface.
Oh, wow.
And so at the time, they just said, well, screw it, make everything flat then. And then we'll figure out the flight control system so that it actually flies afterwards.
Oh, that's crazy.
Yeah. So I'll definitely send you the videos, and then I'll post them in the show notes. But they are very relevant to those flight chapters. He's a fantastic speaker. I think I've listened to all of his talks a few times now, just because there's always some little tidbit that I've missed in the first time.
Oh, cool.
So what else struck you about the book? I'm trying to think back through the chapters. I couldn't believe how early they were able to measure it down to 10 millionths of an inch.
Yeah, it feels like their measurement system, improved drastically really quickly. And then I almost want to say there's not a dead period, but there's a gap between 1900 and about 1960, 1970, probably when computers came along, where he did mention the jet engine stage in that era, but I feel like there's a lot, maybe I guess the wars interrupt a lot of stuff, but they also advance a lot of stuff.
Right. Yeah. Well, he talks about that quite a bit, the dark side, that
yes,
the military always is leading these kind of changes and things.
Yeah.
One thing that I thought was super interesting is that there seemed to be this rush of development in Britain of precision, but until they linked precision with interchangeability, there was this dead period where it was well, it's super precise, but nobody else can, even Henry Ford, when he had the fight with SKF, he was well, my parts are perfectly in tolerance. And it's they're intolerant to themselves, but there's no standard that you're using, and nobody else can check your parts. And when you put a bearing in your thing, it doesn't work. So
yeah. I did like the story too about how the metric system has evolved, and how the standard of what a meter and actually, that probably is the most striking chapter now that I think about it. How at the end of the day, the entire metric system is based on time. Every unit is a function of time. When he explains it that way and you look at it, it's crazy. It's crazy to think that your weight is calculated in a function of time. So is distance and everything else.
Yeah. Well, and just how many times they revised that standard was really interesting. You know, they were like, "Oh, well, now we've done it. We've made the perfect one," and then somebody like a few years later was like, "Well, not really. You know, there's this problem with it," and like switching all the metals for the standards, and then realizing that even that's not good. It was very, very interesting. I want to say that that's either the last chapter or the afterward, but
Yeah.
I thought that was really, really interesting.
Yeah, I kind of thought that was when he was describing how they were originally getting the meter, like a division of the circumference of the Earth. The whole time I'm thinking, like, why would you pick that? And then he, obviously they go into it and they're like, oh, that's not very accurate.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, it definitely comes from people still not really releasing that idea of like an Earth-centric world or like universe.
Yeah.
They're like, oh, well, this is our Earth, so we're going to make all of our things based on part of a division of that. Like, it was very, very interesting to hear that.
Yeah, and there was a lot of actually the beginning chapters when he's talking about, making clocks to go on ships. I've never thought about, Atlantic navigation kind of thing, but yeah, that makes total sense that they need to know the time on land and where they are to figure out navigation and how important that would be. There's just a lot of elements to that I'm completely unaware of, and I just thought that was really, really cool to see the way people were navigating back then and the equipment they were using.
Yeah, well, and what I found really interesting about that is he starts with that. I mean, that's what, chapter 2 or something, and it kind of comes full circle when he's talking about GPS, and then he talks about the experiment where they put that emitter in that car and drive it away, and the difference between where it is and the signals coming from the one that's driving away and where they are tells them the distance.
Yeah.
And it's like a very similar concept, like 150 years later or 200 years later or whatever.
Yeah.
But very much like of the same vein to determine a very similar thing.
Yeah, and another one that maybe I was getting tired of listening, but the chapter on Seiko, I know that it was interesting and important, but I don't remember anything from it, to be honest.
The thing that struck me about that chapter, I've been to Japan and I love Japan in general, but what I found super interesting and something that like I think would just make the workday a little bit better is that 10 minutes every hour, their expert craftsmen got up and they did, some kind of exercise to make sure that they weren't getting strained at their desk.
Yeah.
That and the idea of like having a 270-degree workbench with every single tool I needed to do my job just sounded so good. I was like, oh, I could totally work there and be happy with that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. My boss went over to the Nakamura factory. I think that was last year. So if you buy a Matsura, they'll take you over to tour the Matsura factory and the Nakamura one. And he said similar things, like the factory itself only runs one shift because they say they respect the people's need to go spend time with their family and stuff like that. So the work environment there seems really, really nice. But yeah, he was saying like everything's very lean. Not to bring lean up, but yeah, everything's laid out for the people. Yeah, it just seems like that's so ingrained in their culture. It's not just, it's not a bullet point over there. That's just how they do things.
Right. Yeah. It does seem like the culture is very worker centric. Like, what can we do to help you do your job better and help you not only do your job better, but like be a happy and productive employee versus like the Henry Ford being like, I don't care if this is mind numbing. You're going to make cars till you die. Kind of thing.
Yeah, totally.
The chapter I found very interesting also was the Hubble one. Because I had always heard about the Hubble disaster and, all that stuff and how much of a mess it was. But I'd never really heard the story of how they fixed it. And so understanding more like the corrective lenses that they had to put in there and the whole mechanism. And I never realized like how bad it was and what caused it. Like the fact that they were using a device that was calibrated improperly. So the mirror was perfectly imperfect was such the irony was just incredibly palpable. But B, it was just really interesting to hear that whole story.
Yeah, I like the part, and I can totally sympathize with when they were buffing the mirror and they missed a decimal.
I can only imagine. We've got the mirror lab at the University of Arizona here does some of the biggest mirrors in the world. Like they're doing the ones for the GMT telescope and a few others. And I've been down in there and seen their crazy CNC buffer thing. And like, I could only imagine seeing that thing start to like streak a giant streak across it or like a gouge in it. Like my heart sank in retrospect for them. Like just hearing that, like, oh my goodness, I can only imagine.
Yeah, I know. If I do it on a one-off part, like it happens, but it's not the Hubble mirror.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I don't think they're going to get any more glass in. Like I know the mirror lab here, they get their glass from Japan, and it's like specially made from a specific type of sand, and then they have this giant centrifuge oven thing that heats up and spins and melts all of this glass into a perfect like mirror, more or less, or mirror base with all of these. It's all hollowed out in the back with a bunch of hexagon shapes. And they lift that and they polish it, and they, a million things. Like I can only imagine if they had scratched one of those or gouged one of those. Like you're talking a year of lead time probably for the glass, if not more.
Well, the Hubble one, maybe I misunderstood what they were saying, but the way that they form that, it sounds like it's a single crystal of glass, which is because that damage that they caused, they didn't replace the mirror. Like that was, you think, oh, okay, you got to start again, but no, they went and fixed it, and then they said that they just compensate for it in the photos. Like they let the astronomers know, hey, there's a scratch on that right there, which is crazy. But I guess when you're dealing with something like that, it isn't an option to make another one.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure there's ways to comp for it. I mean, when you think about it, like your eye has that dead spot that your brain compensates for. So clearly there are ways where you can still see perfectly clear, even though you're missing part of your vision. So
yeah, we'll call it the Dave zone. Thanks, Dave.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yeah, I couldn't believe it. But yeah, overall, I thought it was a great palette cleanser, like you said, and just a really great story to get to just nerd out on cool stuff. Like hearing all the ways, that they're drilling turbine blades to make them cool better. And like you said, I mean, the fact that jet engines run at temperatures hotter than the melting point of the components in them is still, it's almost unnerving thinking like how many times I've been on a jet and it's like, well, it's like one cooling passage away from melting down on the wing.
Yeah, you should see when you're in the cockpit and that temperature gauge it's just cranking up until the red line, and then it holds, and then it slowly bleeds off. And you're like, oh, okay, this good to go.
Wow. Yeah, that's insane to me. Totally.
Even the way that they create that jacket of cool air by forcing more hot air in there. Yeah, it's insane that they run so reliably. Like it's mind blowing.
Yeah. I mean, like what's crazy about air travel is like the accidents are never forgotten. Like when you add up all of the hours that planes spend in the sky, it's like so few. Like the percentages of accidents or mistakes or engines blowing up or whatever is like so little. But yeah, everybody will always remember it forever.
Yeah, yeah.
For sure.
What's the next book on your?
I'm not sure yet. I'm gonna have to look through what I got or look through and maybe get some audience suggestions. But
have you read Good to Great?
I don't think I have.
No, I thought that one was really good.
It'd be great. I will bring it up right now so I can look into it later. Yeah, great. Why some companies make the leap and others don't. Sounds good.
Yeah, it's not exactly, it's not machine shop related. It's not exactly the goal or anything, but it talks mostly about the core values of your business and how those relate to changing from a business that doesn't stand out to one that actually has some staying power. Yeah, I would recommend that if I could make a suggestion.
Definitely, yeah. I'll put it in the running because, like you said earlier, it's the business aspect of this is like the part that I think a lot of us have to learn the most about. Like the machining stuff, like, yeah, I learn stuff all the time. I'm trying out new stuff. I'm constantly improving my skills. But for the most part, I feel very confident in my footing there. Whereas like with the business side of it, man, I am just leaping off and hoping I build my parachute before I hit the ground, kind of thing.
Yeah, totally.
Well, cool. Let's jump into shop new things. What you got going on?
Oh, okay. So I think I mentioned earlier I'm moving over to day shift, and I'm going to start learning Esprit. And so I know that's going to be a total mind melting experience. Have you used any of those softwares? Like, what do you use at your day shop?
I actually just switched them over to HSM Works because we had feature cam and I did not like it. And the other
Okay.
guys were not super sold on it either. And I was like, well, I know I can make parts with this and I know you guys can make parts with this. So, but I have used Esprit a little bit, like the wire EDM class at my tech college. That's what we used. Granted, the wire EDM when I had my class was broken for more than half the semester. So
Right.
the amount of actual code I generated was very little. And at
Okay.
the time, my grasp on CAM systems in general was pretty tenuous.
Yeah.
So I really, I remember it being a lot of button clicks, but at that point, everything was a lot of button clicks because I was not used to doing any of that.
Yeah. It's from what I've seen, and I haven't spent any time on it. I've just, spent the last day looking over the shoulder of the machinist that's running the NTRX right now. We've got the posts and the models for our two Akumas and for the Nakamura, and the idea is we're going to get all of the Islander parts programmed on there with full simulation and all that done. So from my very early adventure into it, I'd say it's going to be a big learning curve. It's different in that, like, I'm just so used to the way Mastercam, Fusion, GibbsCam work, where you make a toolpath and then you find stuff. This is probably similar to FeatureCam, where it's like you design features and then apply toolpaths to that. It seems like entire shift in the way that you do things. But I know we'll get there. Looking at the simulation on it, it's pretty amazing. Like, we've got all our Sandvik holders. You just drop them in. You build up these crazy tool assemblies, and it's checking everything as it goes. It's really cool for that. So I think our big priority is getting me up to speed on that, and then developing templates, tool libraries, basically turn it into a system where we can program efficiently on it and prototype with it, all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of what's new for me. If I'm doing that, I've got an apprentice that's coming back from his first term at college right now, so he'll be back in a couple of weeks, and I'll try to get him to take my position on the. So I'll be learning Esprit, training him on programming, and more detailed setups and that kind of stuff. Yeah, and then I basically got to learn to turn. So yeah, that'll be fun.
So is that a new NTRX?
We bought it used. It's a couple years old. We bought it from the Elliot Matsura, who's our distributor up here. They had used it as a demo machine in a couple shops. So there was a couple places in Vancouver that they installed it while they were waiting for their custom built NTRXs to show up, and then we were able to buy it off them. So it's not new, but it doesn't have a ton of hours on it.
Right, nearly new.
Yeah, exactly.
So the reason I ask is I'm looking on Method's website, who I guess is the dealer for them here,
Yep.
and it says that they come with a built-in automation, like load unload device. Does yours have that?
No, unless they're talking about a parts catcher.
Yeah, maybe that's what they're talking about.
They could. So I think there's different parts catchers options on it. Like, they might be talking about the parts catcher G option, which is the one that comes out from behind the spindle, but that's not really a load system. And I think the NTRX is too tall to hook up their gantry systems. But I know that Nakamura does have some pretty crazy automations, so maybe they've got something tailor made for that machine. Yeah, I've seen a couple different pallet systems, and maybe they mean a bar feeder or something like that. But
That very well could be.
yeah,
Well, that's exciting. That'll be a lot of fun. And I mean, I personally, I always love a challenge. Like, that's one reason I love this trade is there's always something new to learn. So
yeah,
I'm sure you'll take to it really quickly and get it going.
yeah. I like where this is heading. It's really focusing on giving some separation between the machine shop and Islander. The idea being that we're not going to treat Islander like another job shop customer. It's got to be, it is a manufacturing company, and it's got to start acting like that to stay competitive, to stay ahead. So yeah, this is the first step, and I think it's got a lot of potential in it. Hopefully
Awesome.
we can start meeting customer demands.
Yeah, I was going to say, looking at Islander's website, it seems like, clearly things are selling because things are out of stock. So that's good for you guys.
Yeah, definitely. And COVID, there's a couple industries that definitely got hit hard by COVID, but fishing reels did really well. I think anything in the outdoor sports arena is, seeing a big boom, and we're definitely feeling that. I know when COVID got real scary last March, there was a bit of a hiccup where everybody kind of canceled orders and stuff. But then when they realized that people were still going outside, going fishing, wanting to buy gear, yeah, the orders came in, and they haven't stopped yet. So that's, yeah, we've just been hammering away at them all year.
That's awesome. Yeah, I know automotive stuff was the same thing. Like one of the
Yep.
companies that I bought parts from, they actually sent out an email recently that was like, "Hey, just so you know, we're way behind. We've brought like 5 new machine shops on as vendors, and we're still not meeting demand. So we're getting to your order as soon as we can." And I was like, "Yeah, okay, that, makes sense. Everybody's
Yeah.
stuck at home in their garage wanting to work on their car."
Yeah. The same thing with bikes. That's why I'm, timing's super good for me that I've had this almost done prototype sitting on my desk for 2 years, because there's a massive bike boom too. The companies are, they're forecasting like 5 years of disruption kind of thing in their supply chains. So the fact that I'm
Jeez.
here now with something that's ready to go, it's just lucky.
That's great though. So
Yeah.
what's next on the horizon for your products?
Well, tomorrow, make the first parts, and then this week, hopefully, I'll be able to ship some out to the anodizers. That's kind of my real concern right now. Is that I know that we have a good anodizer that we deal with, but I think anybody that's in the machining world knows anodizers are still anodizers, and I'm really nervous to lose, a portion of the parts to whatever streaking or spots or something like that. So yeah, that's where I'm at now. Get these products made. A few loose ends I got to tie up in terms of getting the business started. We're still working on our logo, our website. We'll probably put together a pretty bare bones website just to begin with. I've got about 30 people on Instagram that had asked for the product, so I'm going to try to get out just initially the ones to people that have already reached out to me, and then moving on from there. Yeah, we'll get a website with the different options and stuff like that, and then after that, there's a couple. We keep spitballing new ideas, new products, so I'm pretty heavy into the design phase of the next product, which is it's really cool, and it's in the same field, but it's definitely a little more novel, whereas the stem is kind of a standard feature already. So
Awesome.
yeah, lots of stuff. Not enough hours in the day.
Don't want to know it for
Yeah.
sure.
How about
Well, go for it.
how about you? What's new in Prodium?
Oh man, we are just swamped right now, which is great, but it's like just up to my eyeballs in work and trying to get it out and not disappoint customers and not disappoint myself. And we got another run of those grills, which is great, but they just take up like a ton of machine time. So I've been trying to push a bunch of work through the machines before we get to them because I know it's just going to tie up the machine for like a week straight. And otherwise, things have been going really good. We got the roof or lid on the TC. We got all the stuff to fire up the washdown pumps. We recently replaced the tank on it with another S700 tank that we got from another shop locally that has an S700, because when you buy a brother and you buy the conveyor option, you actually get both tanks, and most people just scrap the stock tank. And thankfully, they hadn't gotten rid of it yet. He was super nice and gave it to us for a real low price, which was fantastic. Brad and I were talking, and the way I found him is I reached out to my salesman and my tech. And I was like, "Hey, do you know anybody who might have one of these?" And he was like, "Oh, yeah, let me give you his number." I texted him. I was like, and texting Brad, I was like, "What do you think he's going to have us pay for this?" He's like, "I don't know, like $500-600 at least, it's a tank."
Mhm.
The guy was like, "I don't know, how about like $100 in lunch?" I was like, Yeah, we
Nice.
could definitely do that. So we got all that running, which is great because the one big hindrance on using the TC was that the tank is so small that the second it started at all evaporating, it would sputter and spit, and like I've broken tools because of it. It was just a really horrible process reliability kick. And so that's really updated the machine. And now, yeah, we're going to get some wash down going on it. And then I've got a stuck Metrol tool setter that I need to unstick and then wire in. And I've had a few people on the Brother Facebook group help me out getting all that sorted. So hopefully I'm going to get that, I don't know, in the next month or two, get it going. I'm trying to make that machine my Speedio Lite so we can afford another Speedio.
Hey, sell me on the Brother control a little bit. You use the robo drills at work, and how would you compare the controls? Like, I am coming out as saying I'm not a Fanuc fan.
I find the Brother control pretty easy to use. It's fairly well laid out, and like once you know where to go for things, they're pretty easy to find. All the alarms are relatively well laid out, and they have like a help button that will read you what's the normal causes and what you can do to release them. The nice thing is like, I mean, I guess Fanuc and Robo Drill are the same way, but because the control is made by the company that makes the machine tool, everything is very specific. Like there's no like on our Kitamura, there are machine tool builder alarms and then there are control alarms. And if it's a machine tool builder alarm, it just throws a code 1 and you got to hit the alarm button and that gives you a number and you got to go look it up in the manual and find out what Kitamura meant by that number. Whereas Brother, like everything is very specific to it, but it's just really quick. The high-speed codes, which we just recently started getting dialed, unlike a RoboDrill where with their high-speed codes, it has to wait or like if you midstream change your high-speed mode, briefly pause to change that mode. The Brothers can do it on the fly at any point in the program. And man, it has been like a night and day difference on driving holes and things like that. Like the amount of comp that I have to use to drive a hole is way, way different when I start using the real high accuracy code.
Yep.
But otherwise, it's an insanely quick control. Like it'll read, I don't even know how many lines per second, but just more lines than the machine can feed.
Yep.
And so it's just very powerful and, decent memory, Ethernet. Like I run mine over Wi-Fi to my computer and just drop programs in it all the time. I don't know. It's just like a good control. Like I don't think that it's nearly as user friendly as a Haas control. I mean, I don't think anything on the market is. But as far as like if Haas is way on the right hand side of usability and Fanuc is way on the other side as far as like industrial brick, I'd say it's at least more towards the center there. Like it's somewhat usable. It has some idiosyncrasies that I've never encountered on another control. Like every change you do, whether it's a program or an offset, you have to confirm the changes when you leave that screen. Otherwise, they don't take.
Okay.
Which, if you forget and you're bouncing around between controls, can kind of get confusing. But if it's your only control, it's like amazing because I don't know about you, but if you're, I'm sure every machinist has done this. You go and you want to add 5/10 of wear comp, and you accidentally clear out your tool offset with 5/10 instead of what was in there. On the Brother control, I can just say exit without saving changes, and then it dumps me back onto the main screen, and I jump back into that thing, and my offset's still there.
Nice.
So it's really, really hard to make mistakes like that unless you're just like blowing through stuff. But
so funny story about that situation. I've recently, just this week, had to bake a safety line like that into our post for the Haas because we've got an old VF3 and now the new VF4. The VF3 doesn't have a probe or anything. So the tool offsets that you set are negative and they're in the 20 inch kind of value. And my habit has been when you take the tool out, you clear the offset. That way, if whatever happened, if you ran that program, the tool wasn't in there, it reads 0 and the spindle just stays exactly where it is. It's not going to move. The VF4 is the opposite because everything's based on gauge length. So if you forget to put an offset in there, you hit go, it's bringing the spindle nose down to whatever. And so that's bitten me twice now, especially when I go back and forth between the machines. And I'm usually like super anal about like tool comes out, offset, cleared, tool goes in, tool set. But on the VF4, you can set multiple tools at a time, so your habits start to change a little bit. So I had to bake a little macro into the post. So if you clear the offset, it gets down there and it says macro, whatever that is, 3206, which is current tool in the spindle. If it's less than 2 inches, which is my shortest gauge length tool holder, if it's less than 2 inches, alarm out, say tool not set. And so that eliminates that problem for me because, yes, I'm trying to make the machine a little bit safer. If somebody goes in there and they enter a wear offset into the geometry and they clear out your, and they put 10 thou in there or something like that, or negative 10 thou, yeah, you don't want the spindle coming straight through the vise. So there's things like that I'm starting to look at more in detail now. And one thing that I cannot get over on the FANUC controls is like, why don't they have a proper program restart? I don't know if the brother does though. Like if you restart, say you want to call up a toolpath right in the middle of your program, will it run through all the settings and start at the top of that toolpath, or will it just go?
So there are two things about that. First is the brother control, which is it's the only control I've ever had this happen, is you can only restart from an end line number, which I don't post out end line numbers, but I do have a post that I need to try out that has end lines at least at the tool change.
Right.
But yes, there is both search to a section, and then there is also program restart, where you can just restart from any end line and it'll read through and change tools and apply all the height offsets and then start from there.
Okay. I could probably live with that. I do like on the Haas that you can, start from like a hole right in the middle of your pattern kind of thing. That's definitely nice, but it's not something that I use super frequently. But the FNUC drives me nuts when you restart and it hasn't called anything up and it'll just, run into things.
Right. Yeah. No height offset, no nothing. It'll just explode.
Yeah. How is that the standard?
Yeah. FANUC does some interesting things. Charging for 512 kilobytes of memory in 2021 still rubs me a little wrong.
Yeah, the Nakamura is the same thing. It's like $750,000 machine, and it's got that same memory, and it's got a larger memory, but you got to find it somewhere. Like it's a sideways mill. Like the thing's going to surface. Like that should be accessible. The Akumas, they come standard with gigabytes. Like you'll never be memory limited on them.
Yeah. Oh yeah. When like all of our and the Doosan we bought at my day job, we ended up having to buy the data server for that exact reason, because it was like, we can't live on less than a megabyte of program space. Like, what are you talking about? Yeah, so we've got a few gigabyte card in the data server, and that does all right for us.
Yeah, I know. I can't get over that.
Yeah, I mean, at some point, I think everybody will have to up their game.
Yeah.
It seems like they're starting to edge that way. Like, I think the newer robo drills come with a few megabytes standard on the new IHMI control, but that's because it's their machine, I think. And so they release all the good stuff first to their stuff, and then they'll eventually roll it out. And what I've heard is that, they're charging the machine tool builders for those options, and that's why the machine tool builders often roll that down through to everybody else. It's like, man, just spec it out. And I feel like every company does that. Like, Haas does it with high-speed machining. Just include that at this point. Everybody is running high-speed tool paths or surfacing something. You don't need to charge me. Just raise the price, and I won't know, and it won't be an insult.
Yeah, it's funny that everybody points out Haas as, nickel and diming you, but man, have you ever spec'd out an Akuma? They charge you for the other side of the wear offsets.
That's what I was just talking to somebody about. Yeah, the things that he was saying that he had to specifically ask for were insane to me.
Yeah,
and even brother does it too. I've talked about it a few times that the pendant jog or just the MPG on my machine is $1,000 option.
Yeah,
They give this excuse of in high production shops, they just want their setup people having. And it's like, yeah, but for every other customer that is not a high production shop, just include it in the cost. Raise the cost $1,000 and don't tell me I'm paying for it, and it won't be such an insult.
Yeah, for sure. Like high speed machining, it's like, yeah, just bake it in there. I don't make me sit there and like waffle on this thing. It's so important.
Yeah, yeah, especially because it's a software switch.
Yeah,
Like just enable it and tell me it's included and raise the price by $2,000 or whatever.
yeah,
Like
we're
it's
still
it.
gonna buy it.
Yeah, exactly. Like yeah, it blows my mind some of the nickel and diming that these companies do, and like I don't know if they do it so that they have a lower base MSRP that they can like advertise, like oh this is where it starts. It's like yeah, but usably it's $10,000 more than that. Like don't tell me that that's what it is.
That's the other problem with it. Like, okay, if you're putting it as a bullet point, like you can get this machine down to $80,000 or whatever. They still don't put that on the website. At least I can go look at a Haas and say, okay, a base model 60 grand. What's an Akuma? I don't know. I have to go phone them.
Yeah, yeah, no, it is very helpful. Like I hope that more machine tool builders start to do that because, I mean, at least base prices. Like, sure, I know that I can get discounts through the distributor or different models or whatever, but at least just give me an idea so that I'm not like, oh man, I really want this machine, and you find out like, oh, it's a $300,000 machine. Like I wanted $100,000 machine. So
Yeah.
yeah, one day we'll get there.
Yeah, I've definitely wasted some salespeople time just because, if you're not going to put it on the website, I emailed them and then they phoned me up and like, I know this guy's busy talking to actual shops every day. And I'm just going, oh no, I just wanted to know. I was just
Right.
curious, but he didn't write it. So
Yeah, no, I did that recently with Doosan 5-axis. Like we were looking for new machines at work, and I was like, oh, I wonder if these are even in the running. And it turned out that I was like way off on what I thought the base price was. Like I thought they were competing with like a UMC 750, and it's not even close.
no, it's more like a Matsura, really.
Yeah, yeah, it really is. So it was thankfully that one I was able to just contact one of their techs that I knew, and I was like, hey, can you just like ask for a rough number from your salesman? I don't want to waste this time. He was like, yeah, I'll get you at least an MSRP. It's like, okay, cool, thanks.
Was that for like a DVF or DFV,
Yeah,
whatever that? Yeah.
yeah, which
Heidenhain?
are super cool, but again, they were more expensive than I anticipated.
Yeah. Yeah, they're kind of positioned as like a Haas competitor, but they're not. They're quite a bit more.
Yeah, I mean, I think their 3-axis mills are very close in price, but like the D&Ms are pretty close to their Haas counterparts. But yeah, the DVFs are nowhere near what a UMC, I don't think even a UMC 1000 gets close to touching the base on a DVF.
Doesn't seem like there's anything in the UMC range. It's pretty good value right there.
Yeah, I'm still keeping my fingers crossed that Brother ups their game a little bit and comes out with a full 5-axis because their 4+1, the M series, is pretty neat. We've got one at work that I really like, but it would be really cool if they did a parts bin machine and made it full 5-axis and put the 40 tool changer that they have on their R series on it and scales and all that. Like, oof, I would be a buyer.
I was going to say, how do you get on with 20 tools or 21 tools? Like I've got on the VF4, that was my biggest sticking point because we looked at, potentially the Matsura verticals. We were looking at the Herco verticals. We were looking at the Akuma, the MV, or the Geno series. Basically anything, but they all kind of top out at about 30, 32 tools, except the Matsura where you could get the full chain at like 90 or something like that. But the Haas with 50, like, man, my first 30 tools are standard. They don't come out. And like it is so nice. And then there's the 20 tools on top of that. On average, I can have 3 to 5 jobs set up at a time and just kind of flip between them when I need. Yeah, I don't know, for job shopping, like how is 20 tools? Do you have preset tools that you just kind of pop in there when you want, or?
So my first, what is it, 10 or 12 tools? I think it's 10, and then I've got one that lives further down the tool changer. All of those are standard tools. Most of what we do is aluminum, so like they stay in there. Very rarely am I hurting for more tool spaces.
Mm-hmm.
What sucks is when I go from like aluminum jobs nonstop to like, oh, I got to do titanium, and then I break down 3/4 of my preset tools.
Yeah,
but it's really not too bad. Like for what we do, nothing is more than 5 or 10 parts usually. I mean, that's maybe 75% of our work, if not more.
Oh, okay.
And yeah, it's really not too bad. I think once we get a fourth, it'll start being a little bit more of a hindrance because I'll have to have, I'll be able to get those tapped holes on the side, and then it's like, oh, well, there's another drill and a tap. So I think we'll start running into that issue then. And like the 21 tools on the M series at work is definitely a limitation. You end up thread milling a whole lot and like trying to use thread mills for more than one threaded hole if they can, stand the pitch, and you get kind of creative with the way that you do things. You interpolate a lot of holes instead of putting a bunch of drills in.
Yeah.
But you find a way. And for my shop, because it is prototyping, like I think I can deal with it all right.
Yeah.
In a production, it gets a little tough.
Yeah.
For sure. So I end every episode with the question, what have you been researching this week?
I knew this was coming up. I feel like Peyton.
Doesn't have to be machining. It can be, anything.
So I'm a new dad. So you look through my Google and is this normal? Is this normal? Does my baby do this for a reason? It's, Google needs a parent mode, like something that you can go to where you won't find conflicting information. So there's a lot of, when is my baby going to sleep through the night? Yeah. When can I give my baby bacon? I gave my baby bacon. What do I do?
Oh, goodness.
So that's my research is focused around Googling how to dad. But other than that, I did take a pretty deep dive into finally trying to figure out macros and post editing for that example that I was talking about when I wanted to put a safety line in the post for the VF4. And then that kind of led out to, I don't know if you've seen the way that the Renishaw probing routines work on the hawsers, but the tool break detection is so slow. It's painful. So my boss kept walking by going, how come you haven't sped that up yet? How come you haven't sped that up yet? And I'm like, okay, I'll figure it out. So I was into the whole editing the posts mode. So we found a fast tool break detection. I baked that into the post. Everything worked good. It's so nice. It saves about 30 seconds per tool check.
Oh, geez. That's a ton of time.
Yeah, or maybe it was 17, but something like that. So that was awesome until, and this is where the program restart came up, I tried restarting a thread mill cycle, and it totally broke the probing routine. So program restarts, it comes down, finds that tool break detection, starts reading through the macro, and then it just fails. It's like, hey, you got the wrong tool in the spindle, because it doesn't have, all the features that were built into the actual Renishaw routine. So then I have to go down this rabbit hole and figure out, okay, how do you tell the machine that it's in restart mode, not in run mode? So kind of a PSA for anybody that's looking at doing this, the way that they do it on the Haws control, and I'm guessing Fanuc's probably the same, is there's no way to tell there's no setting that says you're in restart or you're in run mode, like which state the machine's in. But what they do at the beginning of the macro is they put a timer. So there's the millisecond timer, and it starts counting. So there's a bunch of dwells, like 10 dwells in a row. And if you reach 25 milliseconds or whatever, it changes one of the variables to 1, and then it continues on, adds some dwells, and then the macro says, hey, if this variable is 1, continue on through your tool break detection. What happens in restart mode is those timers or the dwells, it just rips through them, and it never actually hits that 25 milliseconds, and it goes right to the end of the macro, goes to the M99, comes back out, and you're back in the program. So that was what I spent most of my day doing on Wednesday night, was figuring out that whole system and how that worked and why that worked. Because I was looking at the top of these probing routines, like, why is it dwelling so much? But yeah, it's to make it work in program restart mode.
Huh. So what'd you end up doing?
I just copied those lines, put them on the top of my new probing routine. So the new probing routine is now in the 9000 series in the control. The post that I've got now calls that up instead of the original tool break. And yeah, it's super nice. And since I've got that safety line in there, because now it does rapid down right onto the tool setter, which would be devastating if you didn't have an offset in there. But I've also got that safety line baked in there now that says if there's no offset, don't go anywhere, which it calls up right after the. So yeah, I've got this really nice, safe routine now that saves 30 seconds per tool change, which is, yeah, super rad.
That's awesome.
Yeah. It
I
was
know
good
that
timing.
the
Sorry,
whole
go ahead.
G43 thing is a problem that a few people have had with the Brother tool break detection, because the one that comes stock on the control, you can only run if there is an active height offset. And some
Right.
people were not told that when their machine was set up. And so they're like, oh, I'll just throw that M98 call at the beginning of the program. Well, first thing they do is blow that tool right through their tool setter because there's no height offset.
Right.
So yeah, it was definitely something I've been worried about, and like I've actually been meaning to add to my tool breaks detection program the same kind of thing. Like if number whatever it is, 3202 is 0,
Yep.
number 3000 equals 1.
Yep.
So yeah, it's macros are fun. They're really fun.
Yeah, they're fun. They're confusing. I cannot read them the way some people can. Like my boss can, he doesn't have a machining background. He's more of an engineer, and he's programmed. He built his own microscope with a CNC control on it and wrote the software for it. So he can, he was reading that macro system and he just started laughing. He's like, "Oh my God, they're doing this with timers. That's how they're telling the machine that it's in restart mode." And I'm like, "Oh yeah, I see that."
Yeah, it's really fun learning about them, and like when you get something right, it's really really cool. But it can be pretty daunting jumping right into it.
Yeah, for sure. And like, I left the night before and I thought it was working. I thought everything was great, but I had never tried to restart the program mid-program. So that's where these things, I get nervous about them, because it's like, okay, I might have it great in this one scenario. Do I have a really robust, process that's going to work every time, every situation? I don't know. And I still find that sketchy to make those changes and then hand them over to other people, like the crew that's coming in for day shift. They're now running my post and my macros, and if they have a problem with it, oh man, I'm going to hear about it.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I feel the same way. And I think there's a lot of people in the community, they make little post edits and they're like, oh man, I'd love to share this, but the liability of me just like throwing it out online, you never know everybody's use case or every little scenario. So I totally understand that hesitance.
Yeah. But, kudos to those who do, because that probing routine, I didn't write it. I took it off some guy from YouTube. He put a YouTube video of his Oz running it, and then he posted the code under there. So I just copy paste, and yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I'm glad it worked for sure.
Yeah. So how about you? You research anything?
Well, one thing, it was a little bit of research, like maybe no more than 10 minutes, but one thing, it's a little bit of a funny story. So I get into the shop, I think it was Tuesday, no, maybe it was Sunday, but I immediately turn on the compressor, blah, 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 get everything started, and didn't notice that the compressor came on, but it wasn't building pressure as normally. I didn't even notice, and like the Brother always errors out, low air pressure for a second, and then you wait until it builds up, and you hit reset and run my warm up, which changes tools. Well, right off the bat, I clear that alarm, hit go, it tries to change tools, and just the tool change blowout was enough to drop it to low air pressure again. And it was the first time it's ever happened to me. The carousel or the tool changer got stuck mid cycle. I was like, oh no. Shit, I don't know what to do here. Like, and it throws this like magazine error alarm, and I was like, oh no, what do I do? But like I said, I can hit help, and it brings up the alarm. It says like, oh, you got to hold reset and release, and that'll clear the alarm, and then you have to hold release and hit the magazine forward or reverse button, and it'll go back to the next one, and it'll continue. But then I go over to the compressor, and it's thrown this alarm. It's like alarm 43 DST over. I was like, what the heck does that mean? Like, we've had this compressor since late November, early December. Never had an alarm before, and the control, the PLC on it doesn't really tell you, but we have a manual, so I start looking through it. It's not in the maintenance manual or the maintenance alarms. It's not in the operation alarm. What is it? I finally find a page, and it's like daylight savings time over.
No.
What the heck? So I just hit reset, and it builds pressure normally, and I get on my way. But I just was like, what? Because it's the PLC has a function where you can give it times of day to turn off and on, which is great. But yeah, apparently it also tells you like, oh, by the way, I'm rolling back next or tomorrow or something like that. So that was interesting to say the least.
Yeah, thanks, compressor.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It's like, yeah, I happen to live in one of the 2 states in the U.S. that don't have daylight savings time anyway. So I was like, I really don't care. Like, thanks for telling me absolutely useless information. I really appreciate that. But besides that, been doing a lot of car part research. I'm getting really close to my engine swap on my MR2, so I've got a whole bunch of parts that just showed up, and I'm just nailing down the last little bearings and all of that stuff that I need to order and put together. And yeah, it's been about it. But I've just been too busy to really research anything fun.
Yep, fair enough.
Well, Emory, I really appreciate you coming on the podcast and getting to talk about the book with you and hear about your story. I can only wish you the best of luck on everything going forward with your products and company. And again, thank you so much for taking the time.
Hey, thanks for having me on. This is, giving me the opportunity. It's really been awesome.
Definitely. Well, thanks everyone for listening, and we'll be back next week.